Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news, and as we are nearing the end of the summer break, Toto Wolff has revealed that as Mercedes continue to get more competitive, the tension between their two drivers is beginning to rise. Will this become a factor by the end of the season, or will it take Mercedes being more competitive in the championship fight for us to potentially have another Hamilton-Rosberg on our hands? Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. Many thanks for 7,000 subscribers, rocketing upwards, baby. First of all, a couple of things to mention all around the grid. Thought this is kind of funny really from Helmut Marko, because I believe they said a few days ago that they are of course already considering Red Bull, who Max Verstappen's teammate is going to be in about 2 or 3 years time. Perez signed the contract extension until I think the end of 2024, maybe it was 2025, but it's at least, I think it's a couple of years. And after that, of course, they've got to consider who they're going to bring on instead of Perez, or whether they're going to keep Perez. Like, of course, guys like Gasly are probably by then might be out of the Red Bull program and out of AlphaTauri. Of course, the guys like Tsunoda, they're kind of taking the bet Red Bull with the AlphaTauri thing, that Tsunoda might be that guy in the future. Doesn't seem like that's going to be the case at the moment, right? And even Helmut Marko's kind of slaying him really and saying, look, if you're swearing and cursing when you go around the corner, that's not good. That makes you drive slower. We've explained to him why that has to stop, bringing in Yuki, this kind of like psychologist the Helmut's been talking about. So, I mean, yeah, this guy's always going on and on, isn't he? But I mean, I thought this was rather interesting. This also to mention, 8 years ago today was when it was officially announced that Max Verstappen was going to have a Formula 1 seat and skipping Formula 2 entirely. Quite the turn of events, obviously, that happened since then. But speaking of Max Verstappen, he was maybe expecting to be fighting the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton and George Russell this year more often than he has. The lead he has in the championship, of course, is absolutely mega. And the real fight that the Mercedes drivers have had is not with Max Verstappen or Charles Leclerc or each other, but more so with the car itself, as Toto Wolff is going to say in a second. But as they get on top of their issues, of course, it starts to become a thing where Lewis Hamilton doesn't want to get beaten by his teammates, neither does George Russell, and potentially, given the fact that I think they're, well, very equally matched drivers on the grid right now, I do think Mercedes probably have, on the whole, the best driver pairing. Like, tension is potentially going to start rising in that camp, if it hasn't already, because the first half of the season, there was some camaraderie there because they were fighting against a common enemy, but now it might be a somewhat different story, as we shall see. First of all, just this quote from Toto Wolff on the FIA, saying, oh, look, they are transparent, they are honest, they have integrity. Like, I mean, look, I guess this makes sense about the governing body. You're not really going to say otherwise as a team principal, but it's kind of interesting this comes in the wake of the FIA making those decisions with regard to next year's, like, regulations that some people said may well suit Mercedes more than other teams, let's just say, based on the anti-porpoising measures, the 15mm floor height that has been confirmed for next year's rules. So, I mean, yes, look, they've gone down this whole safety is an actual serious concern here route that Toto Wolff was pushing hard, whereas Christian Horner and Mattia Binotto didn't really believe there was any credibility to that. So, look, maybe the different team principals have different perspectives on the FIA right now, and it's not like they're universally liked by the drivers and the grid and the paddock and the team principals. There even has been talking points about, okay, could it be possible that the teams try and overrule the FIA and create their own governing body or something, and like get away from the FIA effectively? Might not happen soon, but just something to ponder every time there is kind of conflict between the drivers and the governing body. Now, this was another thing that Toto Wolff was talking with Lewis Hamilton, right? The fact that, especially in the first part of the season, he was a very positive character, building everyone up, because I'm sure it was difficult for the entire Mercedes garage dealing with the difficulties that they had, and for Lewis Hamilton himself, of course. But Wolff says that the season was certainly not a joyful experience, but after the first few races, he was very special, Hamilton. Even when I was not at my best, he was the most positive person in the room, building everyone up, even if driving this car is a handful. I think Hamilton even himself said, look, he wasn't perfect behind the scenes this season, but Toto Wolff seems to believe he's done a pretty good job getting this team back on the right track to move in the right direction forward. Also confirming that he never even thought about replacing Hamilton because he thought that his commitment to Mercedes was unwavering. So, nothing really to worry about there, kind of shutting down the rumours that Hamilton is going to go anywhere anytime soon. Even Lewis said himself recently that he plans to continue potentially beyond 2023 and into the future. Now, of course, look, as rivalries get closer at the top of the championship, things that get a bit more spicy, right? The last year, certainly in 2021, between Verstappen and Hamilton, between Mercedes and Red Bull, was as feisty as it's really ever got in recent memory. Verstappen says this year he much prefers this year's rivalry, and look, understandably so, because he's absolutely dominating the championship. But as he says, on Saturday night, after I believe the French Grand Prix, we even had a laugh in Paul Ricard, and I think that was great because that's what racing should be about, right? Talking about his rivalry, I guess, with Charles Leclerc. And the fact of the matter is that despite that Charles has led more laps this season than Max, and also he's had more pole positions, the numbers show a very different story, with an 80-point advantage currently to Verstappen. So look, at the end of the day, the rivalry is never going to be as spicy when it's not so close, right? Charles way behind in the championship. Like, they're going to be able to be a bit more friendly, especially earlier in the season as well. As, look, if this championship actually was competitive and it came down to the last couple of races, these guys wouldn't just be buddy-buddy after every single race, right? The competitive nature is obviously there. Now, look, maybe more so than Lewis and Max, that maybe didn't get on to quite the same degree than Charles and Max do in their history together in the past, but, look, when the championship is close, the rivalry is going to kind of tense up between the rivals, of course. That's just kind of how it goes. Now, on the Mercedes side of things, they've had the dominance the last several years, and generally it's been Hamilton leading the charge, but of course in 2016, that was kind of the peak of the whole Hamilton-Rosberg saga. There was other times, like in the previous couple of seasons as well, but that was kind of the peak of it, really, where, even the last race of the season in Abu Dhabi, where Hamilton was leading, and, effectively he could have just driven off into the distance, but Rosberg was P2 behind him, and P2 secured Rosberg the championship, but Hamilton deliberately was driving slower than he could have to give the maximum possible chance that Rosberg could get overtaken by, I think, Vettel behind, and therefore Hamilton would have won the championship, right? So, look, that tension that's only one of the examples, of course, of the tension that season, but when there were two championship rivals in the same team competing, that was one of the, biggest rivalries we've seen. Of course, we've seen the likes of, Vettel and Webber as well, the 2-1 thing, multi-2-1 thing back in the day. We've seen it a few times, but generally it only happens when things are getting rather close-knit. And of course, Mercedes have seen this before. They knew what went wrong in the Rosberg situation, didn't want to deal with that again with, of course, Bottas coming in. But, and then, now you've got George Russell, right, a superior driver on paper to Valtteri Bottas, and has delivered great results this season. When things do get pretty competitive between these two guys, as they are starting to be on a more regular basis, things might start to get pretty feisty, right? It does seem like there's a great respect right now between Russell and Hamilton, but look, Hamilton doesn't want to get beaten by his teammate, right? That's not something that he wants to do, and George Russell wants to show that, he's going to be the number one driver on this team for time to come. So, because yes, they had maybe a common enemy at the start of the season, but now they are more often than not competing against each other, right? This is what Toto Wolff says. I think the biggest opponent to George and Lewis was the car, and that was certainly advantageous in some respects. They used different setups, different solutions, even on some occasions with the aim of exchanging impressions and useful information to come out of the situation. That's the whole kind of Hamilton doing the experiments at the start of the season, but also going on to say that, look, he knows what happened in the Rosberg side, and when the objectives become races and championships, I will be able to tell you whether the respect I see today between the two will prove to be a predominant factor, right? He knows what happened in the past. Like, when it comes down to winning races, winning championships, and the two drivers in your team are equally capable of doing that effectively, then things get rather spicy. And he doesn't really expect, based on this sentence here, that the kind of current cordial nature of the room in there is going to continue, right? And the whole Hamilton-Rosberg thing, maybe not quite to that extreme. You'd imagine there's a bit more respect between the two guys, but you would have thought that in fairness with the Hamilton-Rosberg saga when they first were announced as teammates. And as he says, look, when playing for the higher stakes, I think it's natural to have some tension, but if people fundamentally respect and esteem each other, then it will never go too far. So that's probably what I would imagine will happen here, even if Mercedes are back to championship winning car next season. As it presently stands, that might not be the case. But of course, look, you look at the numbers here, and still Hamilton is trailing George Russell in terms of points. The last several races, though, I think it's the last, it's 5 races in a row, maybe 6 races in a row, I think it's 5 races maybe, that Hamilton has outscored Russell in terms of points. Hamilton's been on the podium the last 5 races in a row as well, of course, and has closed the gap on George Russell despite a good start to the season for him. So look, as the drivers close up in terms of points, they obviously want to beat each other every weekend. I'm sure that Hamilton wasn't happy that the first driver this season to get a pole position for Mercedes was none other than George Russell, and he certainly wants to be the Mercedes driver that's going to get the first win this season for Mercedes if there is to be one. So that's just how these things tend to go, right? The teammates want to beat each other, and as the car is now maybe no longer their enemy as much as it was before, then their immediate enemy becomes outscoring their teammates, especially if they are both potentially in a position to win a race. So definitely intrigued to your thoughts on this in the comment section below. How long until we start to see some signs of Hamilton-Russell tension? Will it happen this year? Will it happen next year if their car is better? I kind of doubt we're ever going to get back to a Rosberg era, but look, the two drivers do seem relatively similarly matched at times, especially across the pace that we've seen on average so far this season. In recent times, Hamilton has been better, especially in the race pace, but it's an interesting question I'm sure they will carry through, and potentially if they do have a potential winning car next season, the other teams would be quite, they'd quite like to see the possibility possibility of these guys having a bit of a scrap at it, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, so kind of Toto Wolff also said the opponent was the car, not the teammate or the other drivers. But now the opponent, the immediate opponent, of course, is the teammate you are racing next to. So definitely intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you are new as always. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.